Welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Barbara Meyers. On today's show, we're going to be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, sometimes called PTSD. We're very pleased and honored to have two guests with us, Paul Cox, who is a Viet Nam War veteran, and welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
And Steve Edwards, who is an Iraq War veteran. What I'll do is start by talking about what post-traumatic stress disorder is, and then we'll hear the stories from Paul and Steve. PTSD is an extreme stress response to a traumatic event that makes you feel helpless or threatens your safety. We're going to be talking about PTSD from war experiences in this show, but it also can be experienced by other kinds of threats to life and safety. For example, a natural disaster, a car or plane crash, a terrorist attack, a rape, a kidnapping, that kind of thing. The symptoms that psychiatrists use to identify PTSD have been sort of grouped into three different categories, and people get a diagnosis if they have symptoms in each of those categories, although they don't have to have all these symptoms. The first category is re-experiencing symptoms. So you will have memories that come up, recurrent memories, recurrent nightmares, flashbacks, feeling that it's happening over again, and be very severely stressed and traumatized and with a high heartbeat and so forth. So that's one set of symptoms. Another one set is called avoidance symptoms, and that is making attempts to avoid thoughts or feelings or conversations about the traumatic event, or people or places or whatever that have to do with it, or even difficulty in remembering the event. You lose interest in activities that were once positive and meaningful to you. Sometimes you feel distant from others. And the third set of symptoms are what they call hyperarousal symptoms. And those might be things like feeling very irritable or having outbursts of anger, having difficulty concentrating, having difficulty staying or falling asleep, feeling like you're always on guard, or like danger might be around you everywhere, or being easily startled or jumpy. If you think that you or a loved one of yours has PTSD, it's important to seek help right away, because the faster that you're diagnosed and treated, the better the long-term outlook is. I've seen some statistics that say that 30% of Vietnam War veterans that have returned have the symptoms of PTSD, and somewhere between 20 and 25% of the veterans from the Iraq War. Sometimes simultaneously diagnosed things, sometimes separately, a traumatic brain injury, so that somebody's actually had injury to their brain, that's called TBI, has many of the same symptoms. What we're going to do is first hear from Paul about his stories, talking about how you joined the Marines and how you got to Vietnam and what happened when you were there. And
very briefly, I'll skip over a lot, of course.
Yes.
I could go on for hours. But in 1968, I dropped out of college, pretty quickly got my draft notice, which would have drafted me for 2 years into the Army. I thought, well, if I'm going to go off to Vietnam, I'm going to be with the best, and I figured that since the Marine Corps uniform was so good looking, they must be the best. I wasn't a particularly deep thinker.
Yeah.
Still aren't. But, and so I went down and talked to the Marine Corps recruiter, and he said, listen, kid, I can get you in for 2 years. He said, but they're just going to give you a gun and ship you to Nam. But if you sign up for 4, maybe they figured they got you for a while. And you're a smart guy, I can tell. And so you should, you sign up for 4 years, and they'll invest helicopter mechanics or electronics training into you, and that'll be a really good deal for you. So I signed up for 4. They didn't teach me either of those things. They gave me a gun and shipped me to Nam. So I went to Vietnam as an infantryman. I was up on the DMZ, the area between North and South Vietnam, for about 10 months. And it was the war they'd sent me over there to fight, which was, the President Johnson was telling us that we were there to stop the invaders from the north to coming to the south, and that was really kind of what we were doing, drawing the line at the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. And so while it was a nasty, at times, war, and there was also a lot of boredom and heat and cold and whatever. It really didn't cause any sort of moral kind of dissonance for me. And some things happened that are still with me to this day, but it didn't really cause me to question the war. At the end of that 10 months, I was transferred for the last 2 months of my tour to another unit, and I became a clerk. I was in the rear with the beer and the gear, and I decided this is better than garrison duty back in the States, so I decided to extend my tour for 6 months and stay in Vietnam. I wasn't getting shot at, and so I extended for 6 months. I came home on leave, and when I got back to Vietnam, that unit had been pulled out of country, and I wound up in another unit. That third unit, they did not make me a clerk. I was back in the field, and so it was a pretty serious miscalculation on my part. And this time we were not up in the mountains, unpopulated areas. We were down in the rice paddies south of Da Nang. And it was a very different scene. It was mostly Viet Cong. We were fighting the irregular guerrilla soldiers of the war. Lots of booby traps, ambushes. They never stuck their head up unless they had the upper hand. And so consequently, the units who were operating in those areas suffering casualties day after day from booby traps usually, and occasionally from snipers, would get pretty frustrated and not know who to lash out at. And for that period of almost 6 months, we spent a good amount of time lashing out at the Vietnamese civilians in these areas. And the U.S. government had a policy of free fire zones where anybody within that area is presumed to be Viet Cong. We had a policy of, body counts were an important way to measure whether the war was good. We were winning the war, and so it really came down very hard on the Vietnamese civilians. And it sort of came to a head for me one day when, it's a longer story, but we walked into a village and we started killing everybody in the village. And I didn't kill anybody that day, but I also didn't do anything to stop it. And that was a turning point for me in the war. And that was not, I didn't come to Vietnam to kill babies or be around it.
Is that like My Lai? Or
it was smaller than My Lai, but yes. There were hundreds of those incidents. In this country, there's this sort of myth that My Lai was this one aberration, but there were 20 similar massacres, smaller than My Lai, but similar, just in that area of Vietnam. And we were operating within 20 miles of My Lai the day that we did this. And those sorts of things happened in many areas of Vietnam. And so I turned against the war at that point. And when I left Vietnam, just a few weeks later, I was really angry. I was angry at myself. I was angry at the Marine Corps. I was angry at the U.S. government. I was angry at the American people for letting this happen. And I stayed that way for a lot of years. I'm still angry at the American government, but and I'm no great fan of the Marine Corps. But I've tried to I've been able to develop some perspective on how I wound up getting into that, and certainly I don't want to put away the responsibility that I carry for what my actions were, but I was just one in a whole bunch of cogs in a machine. And
did you lose a lot of your comrades there?
Some. And that whole time I was never in a big battle, the sort of the set piece battles like Hue, Khe Sanh, Ashaw Valley, where these big battles where 20 or 50 or 100 Marines or soldiers would be killed. But I was in a lot of little firefights, and I lost a lot of friends to a single booby trap that just took them away. And those things will weigh on me. But the real thing that caused me to really despise myself and despise the war was the day we walked into that village and killed everybody. There was an investigation after that, and they sat us down in the mess hall and had everybody write a statement. And what they said was that some of the survivors had complained to the South Vietnamese government that we had killed 84 people that day. And that number's probably close to being right, I would think. It's a lot of people.
Yes,
and
it is.
this wasn't a battle.
Yeah.
It was as we walked, and there were no military-age men in these villages.
Mm-hmm.
They had either been killed, they'd been drafted into the South Vietnamese Army, they'd been drafted into the Viet Cong and were off hiding in the jungle. And so this was, 10-year-old boys and less, and mothers with babies and old folks.
Oh.
And
Yeah, I
it
can
was
see
just,
how
it
that
was
would.
it was a criminal act.
Yeah,
and
I can
and
see
one
how
of
that
many.
would really weigh on you. Yeah.
So when I got back, I still had 2 years left to do in the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of joined the anti-war movement as a member while I was in the Marines and was part of the GI movement. We put out an underground newspaper that we called Rage, which I thought was a lousy name at the time, but from this perspective, I think it was a perfect name because we were just angry. We were really, really angry. And in the end, when I finally got out, I moved to San Francisco. Sort of bummed around the country for a year, landed in San Francisco, really liked it, fell in with the anti-war movement here in San Francisco and have been active in the anti-war movement ever since. And it really sort of helped me. There's this myth that Americans, veterans came back from the war and we got spit on at the airport. And while I'm sure that happened, didn't happen to every veteran, and the anti-war movement saved my life by sort of people taking me in and not blaming me and saying you shouldn't blame yourself and the like. I mean, the trouble I had was from the old American Legion and VFW guys from World War II who one time 2 guys tried to pick a fight with me in a bar saying, World War II, that was a real war. Vietnam is nothing, a bunch of wimps. And that was the kind of reaction I got from some of the older veterans who were compensating for some problem they were having and picking on me for that.
Did you have any of the symptoms that I talked about?
Oh yeah,
like flashbacks and.
Well, I never sort of flipped into I'm back in the war zone kind of thing, but I would have a lot of intrusive thoughts, triggered by movies or sometimes loud noises or other sort of things that would raise these issues. A particular problem I had was for years was hearing Huey helicopters would really be disturbing for me. It took a real effort for me to be able to go into the woods for a while. Even though the woods is a wonderful place, I'd enjoyed it before. I went in the military, but I wound up walking down trails in the woods, and I would be looking for ambush sites and watching for booby traps. I mean, it's obviously not there. And it took me a number of years to sort of just forget about that stuff because I knew it wasn't real.
Did you have any therapy or any program at the VA?
I'm still in therapy.
You're still in therapy, okay. Well, I am too.
For most of the last, since I got out. I mean, not every year, but for many years, I was in a couple of veterans rap groups, but I've also had private therapists for many years. And I went to some VA therapists for a while, but and it's no reflection on them. Some of them were wonderful therapists, but it disturbed me that what they wrote down wound up going in a file cabinet somewhere that who knows is going to come look at it. So I've kind of, in the private therapy, I've kind of stuck with, with my one-on-one therapy, I've stuck with private therapists.
And what do you think has been most helpful? It sounds like it was helpful to be in support groups, and it's helpful to have therapists. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I think it's very important for veterans to find a peer group to talk to, and something that's supportive, not just going to the bar and getting drunk every night. I remember, which is, you work things through that way too, but only for a while. Then it gets to be just alcoholism. Having a family that loves you. I mean, having a partner that puts up with you, and eventually, hopefully, you realize that she is somebody you need to invest some real energy into because she's taking care of you. And I wasn't always successful, so I've been through a few of those things. But my wife and I have been together for 20 years, and she tolerates me very well.
Oh, that's good. That's great. So you're active politically now in war things?
I think this war in Iraq is a crime of similar scale to the Vietnam War. And it's certainly messing up a whole other generation of kids, which disturbs me, or for young men and young women. More young women now than it was in the Vietnam War by far. And And it just saddens me. I've sort of always hoped I'd be the last living veteran, but that's obviously not going to be the case. And I'm active in, and I've gotten active in an organization, a veteran service organization in San Francisco called Swords to Plowshares, which provides real services to homeless vets and to veterans in risk, and is transitioning from sort of providing services to primarily to Viet Nam era vets to also providing real helpful services to the Iraq and Afghanistan vets.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you. Steve, you're a veteran of the Iraq War,
Yes.
and I'd like to hear something about how you got into the military and some of your experiences in Iraq.
Well, I joined the military in 1991 when I was 25, which was old for that time. I was a few years above the average age, which was kind of at the height of Desert Storm. And it was one of those things that if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And when I get old, I'd rather have the regret that, damn it, why did I do it, than why didn't I? So, and being a history fan, especially military history, I said, you know what, I better do it now or I'm not going to. So I joined the Army as a reservist initially, and eventually became a National Guardsman after a couple of years due to budget cuts and whatnot. But joined the military, went through basic training and everything, got assigned to a unit, did some overseas tours, goodwill tours, building schools, things like that. And I enjoyed it, so I planned on making a 20-year career of it. And met my now wife, and she was very supportive. And after 9/11, she got very nervous that I could be mobilized for Iraq or Afghanistan. And 2003, I got mobilized for what's called a CONUS mission, which is a continental United States mission, where they can send you anywhere in the United States to guard an airport, whatnot. And I was assigned to guard a chemical weapons depot in Utah. So I was there. I was supposed to be there for a year, but my unit back here in California then got mobilized to go to Iraq. Well, as anybody in the military will tell you, when you've been with a group of men for any amount of time, 6 months or more, they become your brothers. So when my unit back home got mobilized, I'd known some of these guys anywhere from a couple of years to up to 10 years, for as long as I'd been at that point, and 10, 12 years. And so myself and a handful that were from the unit decided, you know what, we want to pull off this mission since our home unit is going to Iraq. And so that's what we did. So they pulled us off the current mission, sent us home, and we were home for maybe a month. And then we shipped out to Washington, where we trained with a unit, got assigned to a larger unit, trained up for a few months in various places, got sent to the Middle East in Kuwait, trained up a little bit more, and then we convoyed into Iraq, where we got assigned to LS Anaconda, which is kind of in central Iraq, in the heart of what's called the Sunni Triangle. And our job, once we got there, was to defend that base from insurgents, rocket attacks, mortar attacks, whatever the case may be. And we conducted combat patrols outside the base, looking for weapons caches, hunting down known insurgents in the area, financiers of insurgents, etc. So we conducted raids and various missions and responded to any type of Iraqi checkpoints would come under fire. We'd rush to assist them. And basically we were frontline soldiers. We were infantry, kicking in doors, conducting raids, getting shot at, mortared, rocketed a lot. We had to worry about what's called an IED, improvised explosives, that were placed on the road. And and you basically kept your head on the swivel 24/7. We'd go out on 8 to 12-hour missions every day, 5, 6 days a week. If you were lucky, you got a day off. And that was your life. That was your life for a year.
I can't think of anything that would be more stressful than something like that.
It wasn't so much stressful because you got used to the life very quickly. You got used to doing your job. You knew your job. Everybody knew their job. The first month or two were stressful because you were trying to get into a groove and know what you had to do. But after those first several months, everybody knew every position that they had to take, whether it was during a raid, traffic stops, whatever the case may be, any mission we had to go on, everybody knew the positions they had to take. Everybody knew the various formations we had to take. And we all adjusted accordingly,
Did you lose very many of your comrades?
We lost 3 comrades while we were in country, and we lost a 4th shortly after we returned, who decided to stay on and extend. And it was hard, working those 12-hour days. A couple times we did 24-hour missions where we didn't return to the base, and we'd stay out there. A couple 3-day missions where we stayed out there by ourselves. Our only contact was, radioing to the base and hoping to God that if something happened, because we didn't have vehicles when we went out there, we got dropped off, marched into our little area, set up camp, set up a perimeter, and you tried to stay up. You did a certain amount of security. Half guys slept, half guys were awake. While certain groups were sleeping, other groups were out patrolling. You hope that the helicopter guys were always around to help you out if you came into any contact. And adrenaline kept you going. And the fact that you didn't want to let down your teammates, you didn't want to let down your company, you didn't want to let down your friends and your brothers.
So what happened when you came back?
Well, there's that excitement of being home, being out of harm's way. Just being happy, sleeping in your own bed, not having to worry about getting shot at, getting up whenever you wanted to, being home with my wife and daughter again. And for the first month, it was great. It was wonderful. But after that first month, everybody started noticing in me that I couldn't sit still. We'd sit down to watch TV. I couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes. I had to get up, to check the windows, had to check the door. Oh, I heard something outside, so I'd go outside and I'd have to check the perimeter of my house. I'd sit back down. 5 minutes later, I had to get up and do the dishes. I could not sit still. I had to constantly be on the go. If we went out, the moment I get out of the car, a routine that we practiced when we got in and out of our vehicles, I would do getting out of my car back home, which was a 5 and a 20. You looked 5 meters outside before you even opened your door. Then you opened your door, you did a 20-meter sweep to make sure there were no booby traps or anything out there.
So you were...
So I was still in that
mentally
mode.
there, yeah.
Then I'd look second-story windows. I'd look at roofs for snipers. And this went on, and my wife would just, you're home, Stephen, you're home. And I'm like, yeah, I know. She's like, well, you're not acting like you're home.
Yeah.
And then after that, after the hypervigilance, after I started noticing the hypervigilance, then, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Then the depression and the anger started kicking in. I couldn't, I felt out of sorts. And then I just grew distant from my wife and daughter. Friends would call to make plans to get together, and I'd always find a reason not to go out with them. I didn't want to be around anybody.
And how did you end up getting help?
One day I just had kind of a breakdown. I just, my wife and I were talking, and I just collapsed on the floor, burst into tears for no reason. And I just said, I need to go to the VA. I need to go to the VA now. There's something wrong with me. I can't handle this. I've got to get somewhere where I can get help, because right now I'm having thoughts in my head that are not healthy. And she goes, well, what kind of thoughts? And I said, you don't want to know. There's scary thoughts that you don't need to know, that you don't want to know. Just get me to the hospital, please. And she took me.
That's great that you knew a place to go. And
Yeah, and you know, and my wife, bless her heart, has been extremely supportive. And so is my daughter. They struggle with it a lot, because initially they were trying to understand what was going on. And eventually I told them, you know what, stop trying to understand me. Just accept the fact that I'm different. And I learned that later, you know, hey, look, you're a different person. Accept that in yourself. And try to get other people to just accept that. Don't try to understand it. Just accept that you've changed, and that's okay.
We have to move on. I'd like to give some resources and organizations to the people that are watching. There is a National Center for PTSD. The two organizations that you are involved with, Veterans Villages, and Swords into Plowshares, are ways that people can get involved. I think it has some good advice for people. Join one of these organizations, find a peer group, get involved with whatever programs they can in the VA. I want to thank you both for being here. I'll close with these words by Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there's another truth. You are not alone. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.